There's a scene in the movie 8 Mile, which, if you're not familiar, it's basically the story of Eminem when he was younger and trying to make it as a rapper in the underground scene in Detroit, where he is talking to one of his friends who works, him and his friends work at the same place. I believe they work in some kind of factory. And he has a few run ins with his boss, or he has some issues with his boss or his manager. And he's getting frustrated, obviously, because whatever job he has is not what he wants to do. He wants to be a rapper. And he's had issues with, I think he comes in late, or he's not getting things done, or he's distracted. And initially, he gets frustrated. And in a conversation with one of his friends, he says, why is so and so, the manager, he's like, why is he always giving me a hard time? So, I come in and I do my work or something along those lines. And he says, but he always gives me a hard time. He keeps giving me a hard time. Why does he keep doing that? And his friend says something that is very simple, but I think very profound. And his friend says, he keeps giving you flack because you keep giving him a reason to. And I think most people in that situation would get frustrated and put the blame on the manager or the teacher or the professor or the parent or whoever, and think, why am I getting picked on? Why am I getting reprimanded or disciplined or whatever it is? Which in a sense is a form of entitlement, because you're immediately looking at the other person and not looking at what you're doing wrong. And the reason you're probably not looking at yourself is because if you did mess up, in your head there's a reason that you messed up that excuses the mistake. So if you show up late, and I think that's what happens in the movie, he shows up late and the guy gives him a hard time, but he shows up late because he was dealing with something personally or whatnot. And so in his mind, I think he's saying, in his mind, he's approaching it as there's a validity to him being late or whatever it is. I haven't seen the movie in a while, but that scene sticks out, so I could be wrong here. But anyway, whatever issue he had or whatever mistake he made, I think he feels to some degree that it's excusable or justified that he is showing up late or his performance is lacking or whatever it is. And if you flip that and look at it from the other perspective, all the manager is seeing is that he's late. All your professor is seeing is that you didn't turn the assignment in on time. All your manager is seeing is that you didn't finish the project on time. You didn't hit the deadline. All your parents are seeing is that you said you would do something and you didn't do it. Now, whether or not you didn't do it out of laziness or fear or a valid reason that you didn't do it, whatever that reason could be, the fact of the matter is that whatever you were supposed to do, whatever you were responsible for, was not met. And there's a trap where people often think that whatever they did or didn't do or failed to do that caught them in trouble is somehow not their fault. And the thing is that even if it isn't, even if there were so many other factors or forces working against you, at the end of the day, if something doesn't get done, it doesn't get done. If it's your responsibility and it doesn't reach whatever point it's supposed to reach or whatever other people's expectations are, or if other people are depending on you, all they see is that this thing didn't get done. And that can get excused for some time, but if it keeps happening, eventually it gets to a point where all they're going to see is that the work isn't getting done, that you're not hitting your responsibilities, that you're not meeting your goals. And the longer that you are unable to resolve that problem, or the longer that you look at it as things being unfair, or someone not giving you enough credit, or life making things very difficult for you, the harder it's going to be to break out of that. And some people never break out of it. And they hold that pattern for the rest of their lives, and then their lives never get to a point where they want them, and they get confused and frustrated and bitter and resentful. Now, what happens in that moment, I think, is a lot of people play the blame game. Like, I was late because my alarm didn't go off. I was late because I didn't sleep well because my neighbors were being loud, or fire alarm went off, or whatever it is. And those things could all be true. And then if you do show up late to work or you miss something, you get frustrated and upset and you start blaming the other person for being too rigid or being too domineering or too overbearing or micromanaging or whatever it is, instead of looking at the fact that whatever happened, and you have to take responsibility for it, especially as a man and as an adult. You don't have to play the blame game. You don't have to take the blame for everything. But if something happens outside of your control that impacts something else in your life, especially something that affects other people, you have to take responsibility for it. And the wild thing is, we all want to blame someone else or put it on someone else because then we don't have to look at ourselves. But the sooner you're able to understand and really think that you're responsible for everything that happens to you, the sooner you realize how much power you actually have to influence everything around you and influence your life and take control of your own life and the impact you have on other people. It's something that seems very daunting at first, because when you think I have to take responsibility for everything, it can be scary and it can feel overwhelming. And I think that the only reason it does that is because we're not taught the actual power we have over our lives. A lot of people coast through life, run on autopilot, and they don't understand or realize that they can take control of their lives. And the sooner you take control of your life, as scary as it might feel, you actually, when you start to take those steps, you feel very empowered. You start to feel a lot better. You start to feel much more in control. And you realize that while it might be scary to go into uncharted territory, every time you take a step towards being responsible for yourself, responsible for your actions, you build strength and you build power in yourself. And once you start to do that, things are never really the same again. And it has this reverse effect where the more you start to take responsibility for yourself, the more you start to see your own patterns. And yeah, there might be things, because there might be things outside of you, there might be outside forces that make things harder for you, but you start to understand that, okay, the world is pushing on me here and there, life is having these effects on me or getting in the way, but you start to see your own patterns and how you kind of mold to these common issues that you have, and you start to understand how you can adjust yourself so that these issues get resolved, or that they're not as big of issues, or that they don't impact the rest of your life. And when you start to do that, things change very quickly. And the main thing there is that you want to be consistent with understanding these things and adjusting them and changing them around. Because at the end of the day, regardless of the situation, you can only blame everybody else for so long. You can only blame your alarm clock for so long. You can only blame loud neighbors, or you can only blame family issues, or you can only blame relationship problem, whatever, anything at all that happens that causes you to underperform or to not meet the expectations that people have of you. You can only blame those things for so long before the world kind of gets sick of it, before you become the guy who can't take any responsibility for yourself, before you become the guy who's unreliable because he can't get places on time or can't get things done on time. And I think in school and in low-level situations or entry-level jobs, you can kind of get away with things here and there, but in the real world, you get to a point where you're hit with very real consequences. If you miss deadlines at work, you're not going to be there much longer, right? If it becomes a habit, even if there is too much stuff going on. And it's good to have, the best thing is for you to understand ahead of a bad situation what needs to be done to fix the problem. And that could be something as simple in a work situation as, like, maybe you are getting hit with way too many things and it's causing other problems. It's causing you to miss deadlines or miss projects or whatever it is. And the thing is that you can keep trying to do everything and keep missing things until it gets to a point where you're in trouble. Or that's a situation where, in terms of the responsibility that you have for yourself, you bring that up to people who can help you prioritize, who can take things off your plate, who can do whatever, right? That's just one example. But that's the thing in terms of taking responsibility and learning how to operate within the space that you have. Maybe you work at a place where too many people dump projects on you and all seem urgent, and then the projects that you're supposed to work on for your manager aren't getting done. That's a situation where the responsible thing would be to communicate ahead of time before things start to fall off that other people are waiting on you for, especially people above you. You could communicate this issue that you're running into with members of your team or your manager and be like, yo, I have way too much stuff coming my way. Everyone just shows up and dumps stuff on me and tells me they need it immediately. And so then it's like my focus shifts and I start working on that. So it's like I need help, managing this stuff. If you do it ahead of time, then you're much less likely to face dire consequences later for missing something, right? And you can apply that example to anything. If you have a very disruptive family and you're doing schoolwork and you can't get your schoolwork done because everyone's bothering you and things are getting crazy and things are happening, that's, if you get to the point where you're turning assignments in late or you're missing assignments, then you're way past the mark. So the responsible thing to do would be to make it very clear to the people that are being disruptive that, hey, I need you to not take up my time here. I need you to not take up my time here. I need you to not do this. I need you to not do this. And family stuff is weird because some people just don't care. And then the situation is, well, if you have people who don't respect your time and they're causing issues in your life professionally or academically, you got to think, all right, they're not going to change, so what can I do? And maybe that means staying longer at school and doing your work there, working on things before you get home, or leaving the house for a bit and going to a coffee shop or a co-working space or whatever, right? Like when you start to take responsibility, you start to see the other solutions and possibilities that you have to fix your problem. Whereas if you keep blaming these other circumstances and these other people, you'll never actually look for a solution that's going to work. And then the longer you go down that path, you'll become somebody who feels entitled that problems shouldn't fall into their lap, that they shouldn't have to deal with issues coming from other people, and that they should be excused if problems arise outside of their control. But the fact of the matter is, as you progress in life, I think the simplest way to say it is that regardless of what you're involved in, either the work gets done or it doesn't. Regardless of what's going on. At the end of the day, either the things get done or they don't. The work gets done or the work doesn't get done. And if the work doesn't get done for a long enough time period, then life starts to really get pretty bad. And that's the same thing with your personal health, with health, financial stability, whatever it is, right? There's people who always seem to be living paycheck to paycheck. They can never quite save. They're always struggling. And they might have other issues coming up. They might have things come up all the time. They seem to always have things coming up that financially wreck them or whatever it is. But you have to stop and think that if that is the case, over a long enough time period, either it's in that situation, the work would be like saving up money, right? It's like, well, at some point it's either going to get done or it's not. And if it doesn't get done, then you're going to be in this cycle forever. So you can keep looking at all these bad things that happen, or you can look at the patterns that lead to them. And the funny thing is that the excuses that people think aren't excuses are still excuses. Because people will understand, they'll have the self-awareness to know that when they are making an excuse, and they'll even admit that, they'll say, yeah, this is an excuse. But then they'll have a bunch of other things that in their mind it's not an excuse. It's a justified reason for why they didn't get where they wanted to go, or what came up that stopped them, or whatever it is. But the fact of the matter is, the things that you think aren't excuses are still excuses if they prevent you from getting to your goal or getting things done that you need to get done. And it's a tough pill to swallow initially. And it is difficult and it is scary to take responsibility for yourself fully and 100%. But the sooner you start to do it, the better you will feel. The more your life will improve and the faster rate at which it will improve. And this isn't to say that every situation is bad, or every situation is excusable. There are some people who need a lot of help. There are some people in situations where they're basically underwater, especially nowadays, and they do need some outside help. They do need someone to step in and give them a chance. And if given that chance, a lot of those people will thrive. And if you are in that situation, then take what I'm saying with a grain of salt and seek help. If there is someone there who can help you, then seek help from that person. But I think that a lot of people like to think they're in those situations when they actually aren't. They're in a situation where they could help themselves a lot more than they are, and they honestly just choose not to. So I guess at the end of the day, it comes down to, either the work gets done or it doesn't, and it's up to you if it gets done or not. So make that decision for yourself. Are you going to be somebody who lets excuses get in the way, or are you going to be someone who gets things done regardless of what happens? And the funny thing is, if you take full responsibility and you work your ass off and you become somebody who's mostly reliable or who's almost always reliable, who's always getting things done, the weird thing is that when an inexcusable when something simple, when something basic happens, people are actually much more likely to give you a lot more leeway. It's weird how that works, but the person who's always on it, when they slip up or when they have a simple fail or when they have something get in the way that shouldn't have gotten in the way, something as simple as like their alarm not going off and them showing up late to something, more often than not, people will excuse it. People will be like, don't worry about it, it's all good. But somebody who's always dealing with that issue, people just get sick of it. People get sick of it and they see that person as unreliable. Or if it's a work situation, you might be in a really bad spot and you might get cut. Or people just get to a point where they just expect that from you and they don't really expect you to change or anything else, which is actually a really bad spot to be in. As frustrating as it is for people who are on top of their stuff and working hard, seeing somebody get just get passes left and right. It's actually a much worse situation for the person who is routinely so unreliable and such a failure at most things, most basic things, that nobody expects anything from them. Because what ends up happening then is that person just keeps doing what they've been doing. And until life hits them really hard, they won't ever actually change. And usually when you go down that path long enough, when life does shake you up in a way that causes a change, it's usually so painful that it really shifts the person's identity and psyche as a whole. So don't end up in that situation. Change when things are good. Implement changes and implement responsibility and ownership before things get so bad that they blow up in your face. Because you can change in a state of joy and happiness, or you can change in a state of pain and suffering. And I can promise you that the former is a lot better than the latter. And it is tough because when things are good, you don't really want to change. And, if you just have a few issues here and there. But the thing is that the few issues here and there start to turn into bigger and bigger issues further down the line. So I don't know if that made sense, but I hope it did. At the end of the day, it just comes down to, either things get done or they don't. Either you're making progress toward your goals or you're not. And you don't want to become somebody who has a reputation for being unreliable, because that snowballs into a really bad situation. So don't let that be you.